So today's speaker is Ellis McDowell-Loudan. She's an anthropology professor at SUNY Cortland, just up the hill. And this is clearly a topic that's got a lot of interest, so we hope you enjoy. And thank you for coming. If you did not sign in when you came in, please sign out on your way out. And there are surveys on the table. We're always looking for topic ideas or speakers. Also, if you want to join our online newsletter list, we'll add you, and then you get email updates about everything that's going on. And did I miss something? Make sure you get some refreshments, and we hope you enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you'll be able to hear me. Is this a good spot, or do I need to move up? And block the view?
You need to move up.
Yeah, right up front, right up front.
But I went to the back to get out of the way.
Can't do that, I'm sorry. No hiding.
How's this? Will this work?
Very good, thank you.
Tell me if my voice gets softer. I have hearing aids and it's very loud in my head. So
We have them too, and it's not loud enough at all.
it's a pain sometimes, but we're grateful for those things. In any case, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the SUNY Cortland archaeology program and the kinds of things that we do and where we find things. I've been doing this in the Portland area for 44 years, and never mind adding and subtracting. But, you know, I had finished my PhD when I got to that stage and came here, and I've loved it. I like Portland. In any case, what I do many years is to have an archaeology field school and take college students out and teach them to love what I love. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. This is a picture of one of our recent field school outings with visitors from a Cornell and Pittsburgh archaeology field program who came over to see what we were doing. And immediately when they got there, the sky darkened. I don't know whether you can see, but we had one of the normal Cortland County storms. And so they all had to scurry back to their vehicles and leave. But it was a beautiful day to start. I put this in because this is this year's Archaeology Matters poster from the New York State Archaeological Association and New York Archaeological Council. It was prepared by one of the contract archaeology groups, and the statements on it, I think, are especially fitting because I imagine everyone here is concerned with our past and why people are interested in our past. And so you have here, the past matters because it gives us an understanding of human history. It helps us find our past here from the past. And each of these I will let you read rather than reading it to you. In my classes, I read it to them and they say, wait, I don't have time to write it all down. But, you know. So the past matters. And I think that's sort of the underlying. Hello.
Sorry, we're late. We got lost. I couldn't find this first.
Remember, trying to get rid of your chariot is another difficulty, is it not?
Yeah.
So, the past matters. And the footsteps to the past are what we look for. In case you don't know where you are, this is Portland County, and more or less in the center, we have where we are. I put this in because you also have the waterways, the major waterways indicated. And it has been along those waterways that practically every bit of evidence I've ever found has turned up. So, keep in mind the Cuyahoga River, the Otsilic River just over in the corner close to the bottom, and imagine all the tributaries that we discover when it actually rains in this area. So, where am I? Does this look familiar to anyone? I would think it might look, Where are we? You nodded. What do you think? That looked like something that might not be quite the same now. Where are we?
It looks like by going to Binghamton.
It's on Route 13. It's been on Route 13. And another shot. This would have been better. landmark in Cortland County is an extremely important one because we know now that those Native Americans stopped where the east and west branch of the Cuyahoga come together. Obviously, because there's a McDonald's. There are lots of places to go. My favorite grocery store is right there. Who could ask for more? So, here is this location. The picture is old now. It's well over, what, 10 years old, I think. So, it's changed some more. The sign, the historic marker that's sitting right here. Whoop, I went too far. Back. The historic marker claims there was a village there. That historic marker got up and walked from one spot to another right in that area while they were doing construction and finally reappeared. But I think the bottom line is we need to realize that historic markers don't necessarily mark the location of the things they talk about. There may have very well been a village at the junction of the two rivers. We know that people were there. There was the Yeaman Park spring, freshwater spring that was important.
Could I say something? I know they were there because in that river behind Yemen, there's like a little island, and there are a lot of Indian artifacts in there. We lived there and we used to go up and get them. Stuff, so there was a village. Or at least they were there.
I know. Oh, I know they were there.
Yeah.
But we did some excavations
Yeah, they were
in
there.
'74, right behind Wendy's. And there was abandoned sheds and things back there in that area. But all around there had been materials, but they moved stuff. A lot of things were moved for 81.
Stay long in one place.
Oh, no. In many cases, they were migrating through, and that was a meeting point.
Yeah.
Which makes it very helpful to realize that you might find a mixture of materials. And we do. On the East Branch, because it was such a hot day, I threw in a couple of pretty views of the East Branch when there's lots of water and everything's green and it's so nice and cool when you walk in the water. And some of the tributaries. Upstream, and sort of close to the road leading up to the landfill, there is a very large area with a number of stopping points that the native people made many years ago, and probably consistently. When the local Haudenosaunee, the Onondaga, and we've also had Mohawk and Oneidas come to visit, have gone up this particular pathway, up the hill to its spring beginning, and all along the way in this wooded area, they have found herbs that are the medicinal herbs, the herbs used for all sorts of other purposes, and they were very impressed by what was still there. And because it is an area that is somewhat inaccessible and on private property, it has been slightly protected. So this area has been blessed in recent years by visits from the native leaders, and they have found it a very spiritual place as well. Another view of it when it has water, and very lovely. But again, the terrain varies from upstream to downstream to where it meets the Cuyahoga East Branch. And each of those areas is a different kind of eco-niche where different kinds of things are growing. I mean, we're all familiar with where the weeds grow best and where the corn grows best and those kinds of things. And this is very indicative of what was going on even earlier. Meanwhile, when my students are first starting out in archaeology, and anybody who has never had any direct experience with artifacts and so on, They say, well, how will we know it's a something and not a nothing? Well, they bring in a lot of nothing stones, and they're always upset when their nothing stones are not the most important. However, one of my students who took field school and also went on and became a professional made us a set of materials. He started with lumps of rock, nodules, quartz, any of the fancy words you wish to use, and he began to make them into various kinds of objects. And at each step, he would put a container full of the debris, or debitage, as you wish, into a plate, so that we would have examples of all the steps of making projectile points, arrow points, spear points, or knives, or scraping tools, or any of a number of tools. Now, why do I emphasize stone? Well, in Cortland County, in many of the sites that we have, the only thing that has survived has been the stone. And this is quite common. And so the stone is what we have as the most visible replica, along with fire pits and a few other odds and ends. So, whoops, I apparently have too powerful a finger. Here are some of the items that we have found, or the students have found in their excavations, and when we were doing various kinds of activities in the sites themselves. In particular, you have this array, and then most of it is the same material, which suggests that they went out of their way to select what was going to work for what they wanted to make. The items on the right side of the picture include not only, this doesn't have a pointer, does it? Anyway, items like this have indentations in them, and those indentations represent the place where objects like nuts were placed, and then a stone like this would be used to bash it or grind it. And as a result, when you use that same spot over and over again, you get those marks that show very clearly. So, those are the kinds of things they find, and after a while, they don't bring in as many nothing stones. They bring in almost always something stones. They work a lot, they work very hard. And most of the sites, even close to the river where it looks as though it might be sort of silty, there's an awful lot of rock, because we're right at the edge of some of the glacial activity that occurred. And so there's a lot of rock. But a lot of that stone is not the kind that necessarily would work for making those tools that you were seeing. Some of it works fine. And sometimes they have picked up objects like that and made them into something, even in crummy material from our point of view. But if it works, it works. And in some cases, a pickup tool works. If you've ever been at a campsite and forgotten a hammer, a stone works very well, and sometimes better than your hammer. So, this is one of the sets of materials that was in a very small, compact batch with a few pieces of burned, charred material. And the more I looked at it, as the students had cleared away everything around it, the more I recognized it as the result of stone boiling. Now, if you've ever had any contact with soapstone, you know that it was used in historic times for heating beds and things of this sort. Now, there were soapstone stoves, which are remarkable too. But these kinds of stones were often put into a container when they were hot, after you had put whatever you wanted to cook into the container. It even worked with well-built baskets. Now, sometimes a hollowed out area in the ground would be used, and you and I might think that it's not particularly sanitary in our modern world of pompous beliefs and concerns about sanitation and give me my hand wash. But here are these spots with these stones. And if you heat them up and then take that stone and put it into the container that you're trying to heat, it does very well. My students have the experience of trying that out in our fire pit in our backyard too. They gather stones that they like and put their initials on them, I might add. And then we have a Dutch oven, and we put water in the Dutch oven, cold water, and put in oven thermometers, and they heat up stones in the fireplace and put them into the pot. And the water, once you get it boiling, after 2 or 3 stones, usually, will boil for up to 20 minutes. And so, my food would be cooked, no problem. And so they take the rocks back out and do it again. After 1 or 2 dousings, the rocks often shatter, and pieces like this appear. So these are well-used stone boiling stones. And this is one of our examples of something a little bit more than just an artifact found without any kind of setting. We know what one of the things was that they were doing. They were cooking. It doesn't like me. All right. Here are some plant processing objects. Again, they have indentations, they have scrape marks on them showing exactly how a project was done. So you get striations, the same as you would get with a metal tool on these stones. And so these show some of the kinds of plant processing that were going on, predominantly in the archaic stage, but it would have gone on throughout prehistory, because these kinds of tools continue to be used all through the prehistoric past. Oh dear, I have a bad habit of doing that. My students in process, we built a mapping screen so that they could map all the artifacts in each tiny unit within a 5-foot square. And in that way, they were able to document more easily and more clearly what they were finding. And by doing this, we had exact provenience of where everything was. Some more of the artifacts. They don't look like much, but this has indentations in several places, and the other side looks very much the same. I think I took that one out. But the little edges that look as though something's been nibbling on them are areas that show how it was being used. And there would have been little flakes of stone knocked off as they were used. And sometimes in our excavations, we find all those little tiny bits. And so we know the working process, the processing of plants, the processing of animal skins was occurring right there. And the skins are gone. The plant bits are gone, except for what we can find in residues. But here are the tools, and here the little bits are that show us how the work was done. This is the other side of those artifacts. Of course, I needed to put my husband in because he is one of the ones who comes and volunteers each year, hoping that it will be the last. But he is a tremendously useful addition to the field school, because he'll pick things up and they'll say, I can't lift that. And the next thing, they're lifting it because he has shown that if you don't, you're going to get another job you like even less. So he's very useful at the site and knows a lot. One of the exciting things we found was in the river, the Otsilic River. It's the only one that's been found in Cortland County. And I was looking for something else up on a bank. I was looking for those survey markers that show you where the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has put things in. And I looked down in the river, and here was a V of stones going from one shore to the other. One of my colleagues, Dawn Van Hall at the college, who was a photographer and still is, came out to the site one hot day and sat in the woods and finally got this particular picture. But I'll go back to this. I tried to. This is the way it could be mapped. Each rock in that whole set was plotted with a transit total station. And then it was drawn by one of my past friends and very close friend, Gordon D'Angelo, aided by his wife, Barbara D'Angelo, and the field school students and a bunch of volunteers. Everybody wanted to walk in the river on a hot day. I mean, it really wasn't hard to get help. And we'd walk out in there, and time after time they'd say, "Ooh, that fish went by me." I mean, this fish trap, this weir in the river, has been there. It's not on any historic records. It's not in any of the documents anywhere from that we've been able to find from anybody until we discovered it. And the reason I recognized it, I'm embarrassed to say, the only reason I recognized it was because I had worked around them in the Potomac River when I was training. Otherwise, other people who have been there didn't recognize it as anything other than a bunch of rocks. But it's V-shaped, and it is characteristic of a fishing pattern that still goes on amongst the Cherokee, amongst the Iroquois, all through New York, up into Canada, out in the West Coast. Many native groups and more modern groups do the same thing. Often within the rocks each year, they will reinforce it with sticks or brush to make it more solid. But even with just this, amazingly, the fish congregate all along here because there's something to eat. It's another one of those indicators of multi-use, because, of course, today's fishermen said, "Oh, we've walked on those rocks. We had no idea they were used."
Where is that area?
It's right down near Landers Corners on Otsilic River.
Is that past South Cincinnati going into Willett?
It's below Willett.
Is it down by the castle? Where it used to be a castle, an old big house on the right?
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, the Joneses farm.
We've been down there. My
Yep.
grandpa lived just across the road and we used to fish down there.
Yep. Yep, that whole area has lots of little sites.
They have a lot of things down there.
Yes, lots and lots of sites. And one that is a Paleo-Indian site that was not open to us, despite the fact that it's the only existing one we found for the time around 9,000 to 10,000 years ago. But it's in a spot where the farmer doesn't want us, and as a result, it's protected that way, except when road work gets done or power lines go through. But hopefully, it's documented enough by some of our reports to protect it.
Question?
Yes.
How did they make that?
We really wonder. There's a lot of rock in the area, but you would have to really horse it around to get it into position. And it's not a natural formation. It would have taken a lot of work to do it. And what's amazing is I have been down there when the fields all around it have flooded, and this is completely and utterly out of sight. And when the water goes back down, there it is. I have seen it when it was low, and it doesn't move. But somehow they built that, and
So
they
they
did it well.
They didn't carve it out.
No, they carried in lumps of rock. They probably lugged them down through the water, probably on logs to put them in place.
The outside of that, where you see the V, the outside is not deep, but inside is.
Yeah, it's not terribly
They
deep
made
now
it-
anywhere,
there's
but
a channel
it's eroded a
going
lot.
out.
Yeah, there's an opening at the
Okay, they
center.
would have had something out there to catch.
They would have put baskets, or the
To get
people to the
fish.
west of here.
There's a lot of eel in that
Yes,
river.
there used to be, not anymore.
There's none?
No, from what I'm told at at Whitney Point, we went to Whitney Point Dam and had a tour inside and out. That's fascinating, by the way, if you've never done it.
Well, I'm talking like 60 years ago.
But in any case, they said that no eels have made it above that area where the dams are since the dams were
So
installed.
they never used to come home with some big ones.
And of course, the native people use the skins. They
Oh,
use
yeah.
they use the oil from eels tremendously. There was another question over here too.
You answered my question, you said there's baskets at the opening
Mhm.
to catch the fish.
Either a basket or a platform, and some did spearing of them. But you know, it would have been a tremendously successful place. I have spent some time sitting there in the bushes, looking down when it's too hot and I've not had enough water, and I've sat looking, and big fish will be right inside here, just enjoying it. And I think, oh, you know, dinner. But no, I have not done that to them. But in any case, that is one of the sites. Just upstream, there is an incredible eddy. It's just around a corner. So if we look, I think it's the next slide. No, it's not. These are the nets that they also used in some cases. And this is a modern reenactor making a net in a way that is recognizable from some of the imprints on pottery and sometimes imprints on the dirt within a site will show this pattern of the netting that's been done. It's terribly exciting when you find something like that and realize, oh, you know, this isn't something that doesn't fall apart. I can see how it was done and what it looks like. And so he's one of the specialists who has made some of the nets. The weir is right out here in the river, which is going south that way. And the students were out in this low-lying area, slightly higher than what's around it, which suggests that it might have been an island back before the river had downcut as much as it has over the hundreds and hundreds of years. But they were excavating in an area that we had marked using underground radar. And the soil is really dark in some spots and not so much in others. And sure enough, a large fire pit, a really impressive one. I went home for about a month with stained hands from working in this greasy, black, ashy soil. It's only about a foot below the surface of today. And it's in that lower field, which suggests that maybe it might have had more overburden earlier. But at the same time, here is this hard pit filled with this black ash and flakes from stone tool materials. And the artifacts are mostly outside the pit. So apparently they didn't toss their debris into the pit. This was for cooking fish, or drying and smoking fish. We suspect, since, as I said, right upstream was the fish trap, and there are lots of fish that run up those rivers at certain times of year. So, very exciting to see the kinds of clues we have, the footprints from the past.
Can you date a fire pit like that?
We are still hoping to do so. We have a whole mess of soil samples and charcoal samples. I need to get a grant, and, because you need several samples. And now the samples can be very tiny, but at the same time, they cost over $200 each, and one isn't enough, even 4 or 5 aren't enough to make sure that the dates are telling you something valid. But yes, good question. It needs to be done. So do the soil samples. They need to be done. Residue analysis needs to be done on artifacts. And the students go off like this, far away, when they hear about that, because that requires a lot of this. And we know that they'd rather do something where they just hold the camera up. It's much easier. But in any case, I'm still thrilled with what I do and how I do it. And the past matters. It certainly matters to me. And I hope it matters to you. Thank you.
You've uncovered a lot of artifacts over the years from this era, I suppose. What has been one of the most exciting or interesting things you've ever uncovered?
It's more of actually finding what you want to find close to a particular thing. And so in the case of the fish trap, for instance, actually finding a darn net sinker was handy. You think, ye gods, it's a dumb-looking thing. And a lot of the local collectors who have been out in those fields will say, oh yeah, we had dozens and dozens of those, we threw them away. So this is distressing, of
And you
course.
collected them when you were a kid and
Sure, that isn't the same as the ones today that go out and gather enormous amounts, tramping across some of these fields where the last remnants of the history are buried.
a lot of farmers don't let you anymore.
No, and I understand it, because in many cases, you go into, some people go into farmers' fields and tromp down things. They even drive their vehicles in.
That's why
And
this
that's disturbing, sure. It's destructive.
I could have brought you a bunch of Indian heads that we found it. I have to know where it is.
Any other questions? Yes.
Many years ago, you and I crossed paths, and I'm not sure, we were out in Truxton on the East River Road,
Yes, ma'am.
and there's a depression, a circular depression, about as big around as these 2 tables and about 3 foot deep, even. And I think at the time, you came out and looked at it and didn't think that it had any particular early peoples.
Yeah, as far as we could tell, I remember being there.
If you laid on the edge of this thing, which is perfectly round, you laid on the edge, you could look down over into the river below, so you'd be seeing what was there. But
Yes, some of these things are natural. Some of them I can be wrong about, because I don't know everything. There are a lot of things I don't know. And of course, one of the times I was out in that area, there had been a mound. And for years, I'd been told about this mound. And so I drove out with my field school crew in their van, fancy van. And I had permission to go on the land in advance that time. And we got there, the mound was gone.
Oh, no.
That was one where they had come in and taken out all the gravel, and I'm pointing it. I drove on down, I turned around and came back, I said, it's gone! And so we talked to the farmer, and it was someone new and different, and he chuckled and said, oh yeah, he said, we took that out. We took that out because we needed to get some money for the gravel. And all along the edges, when I had been there previously, had been dead calves, because that was also the dumping area for the animals that didn't make it. And that was upsetting to another group of students, as you can imagine. It didn't please me either, but at least I understood what was going on. But they were horrified, city students. But I can't say much. I grew up in the city too, but I had been to the farm. Yes.
Could you tell us what tribes lived in this area?
Well, at least back as far as we have information, it was the ancestors of the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois. But we have people who have traveled up and down the rivers, up and down the Susquehanna in particular, and of course the Delaware to our east. And they have gone through these areas. And this area was extremely popular because it was just north of some of the main forks of the Susquehanna, where there would be big settlements, and south of the Onondaga Escarpment area, where also you had a lot of big gatherings. So different groups from the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois were known to be here. And much of their
Traveling through, or?
well, many of them used it for travel from place to place. I mean, they went over to Ithaca. They went east to Norwich.
Just wondered, they all knew better than to try to spend the winter here.
You know, traveling from place to place. There was a lot of interaction. And a lot of this interaction included following the rivers because they're the path of least resistance. A lot of times they'd be in boats, from what we understand, and what they tell us. But so much has been lost.
Would most of their settlements have been seasonal? Like they'd go to the weir for whenever
Yes.
the fish run, and then they'd get the fish and smoke
Exactly.
them and go somewhere else?
This is a lot of what we see. There were a lot of very small camp spots throughout this several acre area. And upstream, there was another little tiny spot overlooking the river. And then farther up, there were more of these little spots where maybe even just a couple of hunters had stopped, native hunters. And so a lot of that kind of thing. Yes.
Years ago, I mean back in this time, there were burial mounds located in some areas of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Were there ever any here? And if not, how did they bury them?
Well, my experience has been that I found esters where we hoped there might be mounds along one area along the river, and they were not burial mounds. And to our west, there are a lot more. It appears that some of those patterns didn't necessarily include the activities that were going on here. Now, I don't think it's as simple as saying, oh, it's a happy hunting ground, But at the same time, I think this area didn't have the same kind of emphasis for settlement. And maybe at the times when the burying mounds were being used, this wasn't a place where it was happening.
I didn't think the Iroquois was buried, and then they put them up on, they made wooden things like this.
That's
Laid
mostly-
them up there.
Mostly that's out farther west, from what I understand. But a lot of it varied. It depended from time to
Well, they
time.
could have got out here too. There's different Indians.
Oh, yes, oh, yeah. I know the Lakota.
Yeah, they
Lakota
come
did a lot
around.
of that.
They intermarried too.
This is Mary Bush, and I'm Dee Falcone, and we both live up at Lake Como,
Mm-hmm.
but that's in Cuba County.
I know, it's right over the line.
I know.
And you know those natives never crossed it.
I mean, we wouldn't have had any Shoshones up where
Oh,
we
yes,
live.
oh, yes. that
Can
would
you
have
tell
been-
me some of the personal characteristics of these Indians, like were they warlike, peaceful, and did they make stuff, and if they did, is there someplace here we could go and see their handicrafts?
You can go to the Ganondagan, which is the one New York State park run by Native Americans.
Pronounce that again.
What's it called?
Ganondagan, Ganandagan.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Could you spell that?
Ganondagan, Ganandagan. It's near Victor, New York.
One more
It's to our
time.
west.
One more time. G-A.
Ganandagan.
Is this the name of the Indian tribe or just something
No, it
that?
is a native name that has been used by the Seneca that predominantly run that.
Oh, they run
Yeah, they run the New York State Park. They have a reconstructed longhouse, which enrages me because it's made out of fake wood, fake bark, because you have to. I mean,
You know, like the one
it has screws that I can see. This enraged me.
You go to the fair, you'll see.
Oh, I know.
Did you say this was a park, Gananda Park, or?
It is a state, New York State Park,
It's a
run
state-
by the Native Americans.
Run
It's
by
the
the
only one in New
Senators?
York, yes.
Oh,
And it's near Victor,
New York State Park.
Victor.
near Victor. I take Route 20, we go past Montezuma Swamp,
Oh, yeah.
and it's down, it's off to your south from that.
Okay.
Past the new casino. Past the new casino.
The new casino.
They also,
I think we go through Victor when we go to Sandy Pond.
Oh,
they also,
Used to go by lake.
they also just reopened St. Marie. It's under a new
Yes.
name.
Yes.
I guess they turned the interior into more
Yeah,
Iroquois or
much more.
Haudenosaunee culture.
Yeah, and it has much more
I haven't
of the
been there
Onondaga
since.
connections. Also,
They turned there.
east of us, over in Cobleskill, or outside Cobleskill, by House Cave, is the Iroquois Indian Museum. Very nice museum. They
Elliot,
have special events all summer.
is there someplace down near Binghamton, some kind of Susquehanna, I can't remember the name, it's,
Oh, yes, SRAC.
yes,
Yes.
yes. I don't
It's
know
west
where it
of
is.
Binghamton, and it's run by some avocationals who are interested in archaeology. A lot of collectors are connected with that. Mhm. Yeah. Yes, yes.
The second part of my question, is there any place local we can go to see artifacts or learn about the Shoshones since they were natives here?
Which tribe is she asking about?
Shoshone?
Oh, the Shoshone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned the
Let's
Shoshones.
see,
lived in
the
Albany.
State Museum would be your best
The
choice.
state.
New York State Museum in Albany.
Oh, in Albany. There's nothing local since they were local Indians?
Not really, no.
Oh, okay.
I can, anybody know?
I
The
know
the only
my
thing you
grandmother
get close to
was,
that
but
is
she
when you
wasn't
pronounce the
here.
Iroquois name for the Iroquois. How do you pronounce that?
Haudenosaunee?
Yeah, that's different. That's very,
H-A-U-D-E-N-O-S-A-U-N-E-E.
I've seen it spelled, I just don't know how to say it.
My great grandmother was a pure Indian,
Oh, well.
but she was native white.
Mhm. There's so many of us who have some native background, but so much of it
And
was
we don't.
lost because
She don't.
they were sent off to
I know.
schools. Yes.
I remember reading in history that there were Indians called, was it Lenape?
Lenape? Mhm.
Lenape. Now
The
what-
Delaware Indians, Lenni
Yeah.
Lenape, Delaware, south of this area. One of my
It's just-
students that I'm still in contact with is in California, and she's
There's a
Lenape.
lot of different Indians out west, isn't even more.
Oh, yes,
These
there are
people
dozens and
traveled
dozens
to
of
Portland
tribes.
County.
Yes.
Since they mentioned Lake Como and that's in my neck of the woods, I just thought I'd throw out there that back in, was it around 47 or so, they actually found an Indian canoe at Lake Como.
Really?
Yes,
I wouldn't
preserved,
doubt
it
it.
was, they used
No,
to
it's
sink
in the
them.
dirt.
Yes, and
What?
it wound up, I believe, in a museum down in New York City.
I wouldn't be surprised, yeah. The
Shipped
Museum
them
of the American Indian.
Shipped in a load of hay, as I recall.
Wonderful, that probably would be a preservative
It's
too.
right in like a little valley, and the streams run right through.
Oh, you know it, you know it. There's sites everywhere. I have worked outside Portland County. Yes.
So back to the burial thing, a lot of times people were just put in the garbage pits.
Yes.
You know, or if they had a larger camp or settlement there, they'd be buried in the longhouse itself and floor. But a lot of them ended up just in the garbage pits.
Yes, yes. Well, and in some cases, that was the appropriate thing to do with enemies. But in many cases, they were buried right within the home. Certainly farther south where I began, some of them were buried that way. There'd be one or two in each of the little households from about 1100 AD. You know, there are so many patterns, yes.
How are some of the peoples like the Namokas and Owascas related to the nations?
They are ancestral labels that have been put on some of the groups that Partly, especially with the Owasco, that name supposedly no longer makes sense, except in 9/10 of the books you read. But it's part of the Haudenosaunee ancestry.
So they are related.
That's my understanding, yeah, that's my understanding. So much was dependent on pottery types, and they decided on who was trading with whom based on a bunch of pots that were pieces that were found in some of the settlements for the later groups. Not right here. There was one in Marathon that was demolished when they put in Route 11, apparently. I know the state archaeologist who was here when I first came to Cortland, Robert Funk, dug at the spot on Route 81, right at Route 13, right near Wendy's. He dug through there and found deeply deposited materials going down with artifacts at each level. And then, of course, those materials and most of his records, except his personal notes, were lost in one of the New York State Museum fires. You know, and so he said, well, from what I remember, and it was 1969, you know, from what I remember, this is what was there. He said, I do remember this deep deposit. It was back before we had to put in shoring. And so people were down in holes they had no business being in.
So would these peoples have been related to the nations in the territory where they were, like to the Cayugas?
There was a lot of, there was a lot of moving though. So much shifting around that a lot of the areas that are the territories from historic times wouldn't really have been that solidified into territories earlier on. And of course there was intermarriage.
I was going to say there was intermarriage.
Yeah, there had to be because there was warfare with a lot of people outside the local groups. And so then you would adopt in. And so that's confusing too. But it explains some of the mixed pottery in the village sites. Not necessarily because you had another group coming in, but because somebody married in or somebody was adopted in. And that's the way they made it back home. So
they married in and started a new tribe.
Did you ever find any pottery in your digs?
That's a standing joke. It's a standing joke amongst my colleagues, especially from Binghamton. Most of the sites I've worked on have not had pottery in them, and I have not done that on purpose. But the one site up near the area where the landfill is had 3 or 4 little scraps of pottery. And so when I finally announced this at an annual meeting, my colleague from Binghamton said, maybe there were people in Cortland County. Maybe there were. No, usually I don't find pottery. And it's not because I don't know what it looks like.
I think the answer is...
It's your quest.
It might have been so valuable that they took it away.
Well, and I'm working mostly with sites that seem to have been earlier people and men. The men didn't bother to carry pots.
They're just careful with them. We just break them.
Men are such klutz. No. When you're hunting and going off on a fishing and hunting expedition, you put them in leather. You carried things that you needed, and you didn't bother with a darn pot, for Pete's sake. If you were in your canoe, maybe later on, when pottery was coming, but not most of the time.
So most of your finds here, you think are...
I'm sorry.
Most of your digs here are pre-Iroquois?
Yeah, pretty much the earlier groups, the archaic and the early woodland peoples.
So we don't actually really know who they were.
Exactly. But, there's no pottery. There's pottery over the line in Cayuga County. There's pottery over the line in Shenango County. Broome County has pottery. And washed away. I mean, I love pottery.
It has something to do with the soil, too.
Yes. Yes. In some cases, we have had what was referred to as rotten rock and rotten pottery. A very scientific term. But it is like the nothing stones, you know, that's another scientific term. But here it is, you know, in some cases we know that those materials just deteriorated and would be just crumbled into nothing. But a lot of it is made better than that, and so it holds up where it has been common. I don't know why my sites don't have pottery.
Do they have the material available to make
Sure.
it?
There's good clay. A lot of places
In that
have good
area,
clay,
good
yes.
clay.
Mhm. In fact, some of my students have gathered some of the clay and made little tiny things and put them on the surrounding squares and said,
Look, pottery!
"There's pottery for you," because I promised
Leave it
them,
here.
you know, I promised them ice cream, I promised them all sorts of things, that they will find certain things, and they don't. And it's not from, not trying, they are. More questions?
But most of the thing you find is right around the river and.
Mostly along the rivers and on slight rises above the river where they wouldn't be flooded. So different seasons, I suspect.
On the higher ground, they can see their enemies coming.
Yeah. Although think how dense some of the woods were before all the farming.
Yeah, for it all clear.
Anything else? Well, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.